our mountain pose. We want it to be a strong and steady, stable pose. So just a reminder, the 3 points of contact on the bottoms of your feet, the ball of the foot under the big toe and the little toe, and the center of your heel should all be pressing equally into the floor. We don't want to let our arches collapse because it ruins our knees, puts them out of alignment. We don't want to overarch our feet, and so we're on the edges of our feet because that can mess with the knees and the hips as well. So nice, strong, stable feet, nice equalized weight. It's good for the arches too. Lifting the toes can sometimes help you find that weight. You can feel it more in the balls of your feet there. Moving up the body, our knees are soft, not bent, but soft. We don't want them to be hyperextended. Our Mula Bandha is engaged, Uddiyana Bandha is engaged, shoulder blades are back and down. We want them to be strong and steady and stable. We don't want them to be squeezed, just gently contracted and behind us. Arms are relaxed at our side. Fingers can be facing the floor. We don't want to squish up our fists. Palms can face the side of the body or forward. Generally, we caution against this because it arches and rounds the shoulders forward. Neck is nice and long. Chin is parallel to the floor. Face is relaxed. It's our nice, strong, stable, steady mountain pose. From the side, you'll be able to see the center of the ear, over the center of the shoulder, over the center of the hip, over the center of the knee, over the center of the ankle. A nice plumb line all the way from top to bottom. So moving on from Tadasana, we'll go into Virabrasana I, which is Warrior I. So facing the front of your mat, we're going to take one foot. For this example, it doesn't matter which one you use. We're going to take it about 3 feet behind us. The front foot is facing forward. The back foot is at an angle wherever it's comfortable for you. For Virabrasana I, we're going to be taking the hips forward strongly. So it's generally a little easier if your foot is an angle more toward the front. Your toes are facing more forward. So we're going to start here. Our back foot needs to have all 3 points of contact pressing into the floor equally, just as we did in our Tadasana. Same with our front foot. So if you can lift your toes up this far and the ball of the foot comes off, that's not equal weight. And the same thing with if you can lift the heel, then you're not equally weighted. You shouldn't be able to lift anything except for just the tops of the toes. Same thing in the back. I can lift my toes, but I shouldn't be able to lift my heel, and I should be able to lift the ball of the foot. One common mistake that people make is as they're twisting their hips forward, they let their arch collapse and their knee collapse in the back to give them some more movement here. That stops the stretch of the pose and the strength of the pose, and it also makes it so you are prone to injury there. So we still want to keep that back foot strong. The knee is soft, but this leg is strongly pushing back. Then we can allow those hips to turn forward. If this is what you've got and you can't go any further, that's okay. Start here. I would rather have you have a nice strong back leg that's solid and steady with good form rather than have that extra movement in your hip. We're going to turn those hips forward, engaging through that Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, shoulder blades back and down, long neck. Chin is going to be parallel to the floor. And we're going to take the arms and lift them up. Another common mistake people make here is when they lift their arms, they lift their shoulders. Our shoulders stay back and down. One of the things that you can do for that to help you remember is to keep those bandhas in place. And when we release the bandha, another common mistake that people make is they release the bandha and we get an arch in the back because it stops that stretch and makes this pose a little more easy to get into. But it's not good form, and it's not going to help you, and it can actually start putting pressure on joints in the wrong way. So you want to keep that Mula and Uddiyana Bandha engaged, lengthening through the spine, lengthening through the arms, but keeping our shoulders down. Another common mistake people make is they come too far forward with their knee so that it's over the toes. You want to try to keep this knee over the ankle or even a little further back if you're not feeling stable or you're losing your form in other areas by coming down too far in your knee. So when you get to be a little more flexible and stable here, you can even move your feet further apart. As long as you're keeping good form here, you can down a little deeper. Our next exercise is Virabrasana II, or Warrior II. So keeping the front foot where it is, our back foot, instead of being angled forward, toes pointing more toward the front of the mat, we're going to turn it so our foot is more of a parallel with the back edge of our mat. That allows a little more movement with your hips, because instead of taking the hips forward here, we're going to take them to the side. One of the things you might notice here as you move into Warrior II is this knee comes in and that arch drops on the front foot. We want to make sure we're keeping 3 points of contact on that front foot and that our knee stays over our ankle. We don't want to let it come in by our big toe. So thinking of pushing it toward your baby toe sometimes helps. Same thing with the back foot. We don't want to let it roll out onto the outer edge, but we don't want it to roll in and collapse them through that knee and the back ankle. Want it to be nice and strong, 3 points of contact, still pushing into the floor there. Now here we're going to engage the Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, shoulder blades back and down. While we're here, I want you to think about, before we use our arms, taking your hands to the crease of your upper thigh and your hip and pressing your thumbs back and pulling your fingers up, so you're like rolling your femur through that hip socket. That's going to help you feel like you're able to open a little bit more deeply into this pose and give you a little bit more space with your legs. Pulling again up and back with our bandhas. If we release the bandhas here, it stops that opening through the hips and lets us sink down. It stops us from having good form and good technique, and can actually hurt some of the joints. So it puts a lot of the pressure on the joints instead of on the muscles. As we're engaged here and we're nice and long, we can open the arms to the side, stretching fingertip to fingertip. Gaze is over that front middle finger. Another common mistake people make here is they lean forward. You can see that my torso is not centered. We want to keep the torso centered between the feet, reaching between the fingers, not forward and not back, centered in the middle of the feet. Another thing that sometimes we see is we lean forward, up or down with the arms. I'm going to keep both of them parallel to the floor. And again, making sure this hip is nice or this knee is nice and stable over top of that ankle, or even a little bit behind, but not in and not too far forward. I'm going to keep a nice strong stretch here and opening through the hips. Nice lengthening through the arms and through the hips. So that was Virabrasana II, or Warrior II. So the next 3 poses, we're going to come to the floor on our mat. I'm going to angle this mat a little bit so you can see some different things. The first one is our Phalakasana, our plank pose. I generally advise people to start with their hands and knees, just to make sure they have proper form. You can tuck your toes under here, and our hands need to be directly under our shoulders. Fingers are spread. Generally, we like to tell you to keep the middle fingers parallel, but for some people it's a little more comfortable to turn them in or out. Just make sure that your shoulders feel very strong and stable here. So we're going to do the same thing we did with our standing poses. Engage the Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, shoulder blades back and down, lengthening through the neck, gazes to the floor. We're just going to stay here, engaging here. As you get a little more comfortable, a little more strength in this pose, you can move the hands out, still keeping the shoulders over the hands, and still engaging through that core, lengthening through the neck. As you get a little bit stronger, you might be able to lift one knee and then the other, or maybe both knees. If you feel you have a sway back, you're losing that Uddiyana Bandha and that Mula Bandha. And if we feel like we're rounding, it means that we're losing that core strength in that pose. Another one of the common mistakes we see people make with this, and any pose where their hands are on the floor, is that they put too much pressure on the wrists and not enough pressure on the fingers and the knuckles here underneath the fingers, the pad of the finger. around the palm. We have lots of bones in our fingers, lots of strength, not as much in our wrists, very few bones in the wrist. So we want to push those fingertips, the pads of the fingers, and the palms into the floor. You shouldn't feel much pressure at all in your wrists. And as we come here, we're going to move to the next pose, which is Bhujangasana, which is our Cobra pose. We keep the elbows in and we lower ourselves to the floor. Release the feet. We're going to keep those hands underneath the shoulders. We're going to lift through the chest, engaging Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, shoulder blades back and down, gaze is at the floor, straight ahead. You should be able to lift your hands here. If you are pushing for more height, that's not using the muscles that we want you to use, and it can actually hurt your back, your lower back. So we want to keep those hands here as just a stabilizer, but all of the work is coming from the back and the core. So no matter how high or low you get, you should be able to use your hands to do a wave at your friend. All right, so that's Bhujangasana. The last pose that we're going to do is our downward facing dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana. So our downward facing dog, you can start with our horse stance here. Shoulders above the wrists, and then we just lift the hips back and down. So again, we need to make sure that we're having lots of pressure on the fingers and the palms and not the wrists. Allow the head to hang between the elbows. Soft bend in the elbows. Chest is pushing back toward the upper thighs. We're pushing down in our heels. Even if our heels don't touch the floor, we want to press through the heels, pushing them toward the floor. But we want to keep a nice even weight. All 3 points of contact pushing equally toward the floor. Engaging the Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, shoulders back and down, long neck, holding, breathing those yogic breaths, belly, chest, and shoulders here. And that's downward facing dog. That's our main and basic poses that we can build from in our asana practice. Hope to see you soon.